this is working. Let's see. It doesn't look like it is. Bear with me here. Okay, there we go. All right, so looks like there's viewers. I'm trying to figure out. YouTube updated its format, so I am trying to figure out how this works. So bear with me. I know you can't chat in questions yet, so just give me a second. Sorry about this. Hopefully it's working. I see 26 viewers. Not sure if you can actually even see me. Let's see. Oh, man. I tested this at school, too. Okay, hang on. All right, hang on. Let me go to YouTube because I can't see any of the chatting. Let me go to YouTube. Oh, okay, got it. Because I can't see any of the chatting. There's a huge delay. That's annoying. Okay. Let me go to YouTube. Oh, okay, got it. Because I can't see any of the chatting. There's a huge delay. That's annoying. Okay. Let me go to YouTube. Oh, okay, got it. Because I can't see any of the chatting. There's a huge delay. That's annoying. Okay. Wow, this is rough. Hang on, people. There's so much feedback. This is rough. Hang on, people. There's so much feedback. Ah! It sounds awful. Okay, let me see what I can do. Maybe if I... Okay, so I muted what I can hear, but it doesn't really matter because you just want to chat in questions. So if you could let me know if you can hear me now and if the feedback is bad, because there's like a 10-second delay. So let me know if you can hear me. Okay, good. Thank you, Priyanka. And is there a lot of feedback or does it sound fairly normal? I'm just gonna wait. It's clear. Awesome, awesome. Okay, great. All right, people. So here's your chance. Ask questions, no feedback. I guess the trick was to turn my volume off. So we're gonna go with that. All right. So now's your time to chat in questions. Whoa, that's not a good. No. We're just gonna fix that. You can see my daughter's unmade bed in the background. We'll just put the screen back up again. It's very distracting to be making a video from like the worst possible angle. I know you guys don't care, but I have to stare at myself for an hour. This is going to be excruciating. See what I do for you? Okay. So here's your chance to, you got to ask me questions, y'all. All right. Still no questions. That's good. That means you all have been studying. Okay. So there's a question about will there be questions about genetics on the exam? Genetics was not on the review, so it's not on the exam. Good question. I understand why you asked it because we had that second semester, but um, no, if it's not on the review, it's not on the exam. So percolation. Percolation is one of those hard questions that we don't go over it in class. It is when water moves underground, when it kind of cycles, um, kind of goes up and down like this, almost like a convection current. But it showed up on STAR, so that's why we put it on the review and on the final, so that you'll have an idea of what it is. The problem with that word is that a percolator is something that it's an old coffee maker. So it had like a tube, a metal tube that came up, and then it pulled water up and made the water kind of go through the grounds. And you can see there was this little glass thing at the top, and it would kind of percolate, and the water would move around in the top. So 10 years ago, anybody who's seen a coffee being made, they would know what percolate means. But your generation doesn't use percolator, so that's why it's hard. So just percolator is, to percolate means for water to move underground. That's all it means. So the next question is, so what are genetics? That's I'm not even going to answer that question. The diagram in the review is kind of confusing. Is there a key to the picture on the review? Priyanka, the what it said on the review, and I had one in front of me, and then I didn't bring it in here. But what it said on the review is to be able to identify the vocabulary above it. So hang on, let me open up the review. Of course, it's going to be slow. Come on. Oh, I can just bring it up this way. Sorry. Hang in there. Sorry, y'all. I'm waiting for it to come up because I want to read to you exactly what it says. So, come on. Oh man, I can't believe this is taking so long. But what it says on the review is to be able to identify the vocabulary above on a diagram like the one below. So if you look at, okay, here it is. So it says, be able to identify the structures above on a diagram, such as the one below. So if you look at the diagram below, and it says an aquifer or an artesian well, springs, you would be able to look at a map and tell me where those things would be found. You don't need to know what pump and treat, industry, excavation. That wasn't the question. The question says, be able to identify the structures above on a diagram, such as the one below. All right, let me go back to the chat. All right. Okay, so Varun asked, I noticed that on the review, the integumentary system wasn't there. Will it be on the test? Okay, so like I said, if it's not on the review, it's not on the test. So that's your answer. So Robert, what is a watershed? You need to look at your notes. I'm not going to answer that question for you. That is in your notes. And on Schoology, Michael, same thing. What is groundwater? What water table? I'm not answering those questions. I'm not. This is, you're asking me questions that are on the review that you should have answered. I am not going to give you answers for the review. I'm here for clarification, but I will not be giving you answers like, what is groundwater? Whether you're, I'm not your teacher, but if Ms. Gary and Coach Wilson, they're both very good teachers and they both gave you that information. So if you don't have it, then you need to go to Schoology and get it, because I'm not doing that. So it's Priya on the diagram. How do you know the difference between pump and treat and the injection well? Like I said, that's not the question. The question was, you need to be able to find, if the vocabulary words above, it says, and I need to, it was that. Okay, so if it said, where's the water table on that diagram, you would have to be able to point to, like, if there was an arrow pointing to 3 different places, you would have to be able to identify where the water table is. Let's see. Robert wrote, groundwater is water already in the ground. Percolation is water moving up and down. That's exactly right, Robert. Eric, Mrs. Walsh, isn't a watershed an area of land dividing two larger bodies of water? That was the definition I found on Google. All right, well, that's, Eric, why I tell you not to use Google, because that is not a 7th grade definition. You need to use a 7th grade definition. I'm going to upload a couple of documents to Schoology right now. It's like a little poster. I had them hanging up in the room, but I wonder if you guys didn't see them. So let me put those on Schoology. Someday I'm going to figure out how to do a split screen on this tutorial. All right, let's see. Hang on there. Hang on there. Hang in there. So, okay, downloads. Sorry. So these are posters that give you a really good, I think, a good picture. I'm a visual person. Obviously, I've told you guys that a million times. A really good picture of, where the heck? Okay, let's try this. Groundwater poster. And it doesn't come up. Of course not. Bear with me here. I'm going to find it the hard way. I know you're all just staring at me, which is really unnerving, but I really want to find these posters and share them with you. And I'd be able to find them right away if... okay. No, I don't know what the heck they are. That's annoying. Okay, well, I will put those on Schoology once I find them. All right, sorry about that. Are we allowed to send the pictures of our review for you to answer? Yeah. Are we allowed to send you pictures of our review for the answer? Yes. I've told you that many times. But you have to send them to me first. Okay. What is the difference between a spring and an artesian well? So an artesian well is water that comes to the surface without any sort of pump, because the sides of the well are sloped, so gravity forces the water out. A spring is just where uh, groundwater um, usually. Um, so a spring is is a result of hills above the ground, and the water runs down and sits in that center area. An artesian well is a slant below the ground that forces water out of the ground because of gravity. So I can see where that would be your confusion there. I wasn't quite sure why you connected those, but now I see why. So a spring is where water is sloping down hills and kind of runs between hills because of that gravity, but an artesian well is underground. So the layers of rock and soil are at an angle, which push the water out. So that's the difference, Farah. I hope that answered your question. Will there be an essay question on the exam? I already told you it's 30 multiple choice. How long will we take to take the exam? You have the class period. You walk in the door, you better sit down and get ready to take that test, because you won't be given any additional time. You will have from the second we hand you the test until the bell rings. It's a normal length of a class, which is why it's only 30 multiple choice questions. Time and soil. The reason why, Farah, I put that on there was because that's the two ways to remember the difference between primary and secondary succession. So primary succession does not have soil. It takes a really long time. Secondary succession does have soil. It takes a lot less time. So I put those on there as a hint, but that's how you remember it. Okay. Can groundwater be on the ground, or is it only underground? Now, groundwater is underground. It says, Armand, groundwater is only above the ground after it gets pumped out. Right. So groundwater is in the ground, not on the ground. That's the water table. I guess that's the difference. Well, groundwater is in the ground, and the water table, the water sits right on the top. All right, Michael, what exams will be tomorrow? That's not what this tutorial is for. Okay. So I'll answer this one, but then you have to keep the conversation to science. Okay. So I know science is tomorrow and LA is tomorrow. But from now on, the questions have to be specific to the science final. Okay, natural selection in detail. Were you absent the day I gave notes to Vishka? Natural selection is basically an animal's ability to survive. The better equipped they are with adaptations, whether it's camouflage, thick fur, whatever that is, the better chance they have to survive. And nature will decide who survives. So I'm looking at the review because I want to make sure that I like the answer that I'm giving you. Okay, so you animals have, for example, camouflage to survive in a certain environment. If an animal in there, let's say they live in a canopy of a forest, a rainforest, and they're green, well, then they have a better chance of surviving. If an animal comes in that's bright blue or bright red, nature decides that that animal probably isn't going to survive because it's going to get picked off by prey. So natural selection means it happens naturally. It's excuse me, it is just like humans don't come in and do it. It is just nature that decides that that's going to happen. So then it says factors that affect natural selection. So if something's going to survive, there can't be too much of it. So if there are too many offspring, then not as many. An ecosystem can only maintain a certain number of offspring. So that's why overproduction is one. Competition for resources. That's part of overproduction. So if there's too much competition for food, water, and shelter, then things are going to die. Predators is another thing that affects natural selection. Um, Variations within a species. So faster swimmers are going to survive. The better, like I said, the better camouflaged an animal is, that's going to increase its chances. And then environmental changes. So if there's drought or flooding, for example, some animals may not survive, and nature decides that. It just happens naturally, and that's why it's called natural selection. Okay. Um, so groundwater that forms bodies of water isn't groundwater. Exactly. I don't understand your question. Like, once it's not in the ground, it's not groundwater anymore. So I don't understand your question. Natural selection is surviving and reproducing, or just the individual organism survives. Um, I don't understand the difference of your question, Tavishka. It says natural selection, surviving and reproducing, or just the individual organism survives. Um, Survive and reproduce is the definition of what an adaptation is. So maybe adaptation is the small thing that allows natural selection to occur, if that helps at all. So um, to survive and reproduce in your environment, that is the definition of an adaptation. Um, if you and if you have the adaptations that are necessary for your environment, then you will survive, and that's natural selection. So maybe that clarifies it for you. Natural selection is what random qualities nature gives to an animal to determine survival. Ooh, Robert, I like that answer. That was good. Um, Robert wrote, I know I kind of read it fast. Natural selection is what random qualities nature gives to an animal to determine survival. So it's not really random because it kind of comes with the animal, but it's definitely it's given to it by nature, and nature determines its survival. So I really like that answer. All right, Varun, I was going over the nervous system notes and I see that the five senses, okay. And I saw that it gave the five senses light, sound, heat, chemical, pressure. Okay, so Varun, I'll talk to you about that tomorrow. We talked about that wasn't the five senses. But I don't want to get into that because on the review it says, list the functions of the nervous system. That's all. That's all it says. So you need to know what the nervous system does. So you're over studying. All right. You need to not overstudy because you're. I told you that if it says know the function of the circulatory system, just know the function. You don't need to know the direction that the blood is pumped. You don't need to know anything about blood types. Just the main function. That's it. So don't over study, Varun. Okay, Eric, is there more than two major differences between primary and secondary succession? I know they occur at different times and that primary succession takes longer. Are there any more? Um, well, hang on a second. Um, Sorry, I have to take care of something here. Okay. let's try this again. So I don't know if there are two. I mean, the difference is that primary succession happens after a natural disaster that takes away all of the soil. Um, and so pioneer species like moss and lichen need to come in and start making soil, which takes a really long time. And then, I mean, we're talking like 1,500 years for a ecosystem to get back to its climax community, which is equal amount, a perfect amount of everything. Um, Secondary succession happens after something like a forest fire or a flood, where even though things are wiped out, there's still soil left behind, and um, then the pioneer species are more like um, small, flowers, anything that could be dropped by seed. Um, and then it takes 150 years instead of 1,500 years. Um, all right. Let's see. Is there a difference between a food chain or an energy pyramid? Or are they basically the same thing? Um, they're not the same thing. Uh, so I guess normally you would see a food chain drawn anyway, more like an animal, and then, or like producers, and then an arrow, and then an animal or an organism, and then an arrow, and then an organism. It's singular. Whereas an energy pyramid is literally drawn like a pyramid. But I see your point, because a food chain shows um, how much, like who's getting what energy. But it's more, also more about who eats who. Um, but in a food chain, that's a good point, because um, the arrow goes in the direction of who's getting the energy. So that's a good point. That's a good point. Um, I hope that answered your question. I'm not so sure it did, but um, okay. Lisa Walsh, and I, how did I? That's strange that I. Hmm. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so to clarify, maintaining homeostasis is the function of basically all systems. That's exactly correct. Homeostasis is what your body is always achieving. All right, um, down to the cellular level. Food chain is 3 or 4 different energy transfer relationships. Yeah, I guess you could say that. Um, but just remember then that but a food chain is singular. So it's just going one organism to another organism to another organism. It's not as encompassing as a food web, um, is obviously, because the food web takes in more of what's going on in the ecosystem than a food chain. Okay, sustainability. So sustainability is an ecosystem's ability to sustain itself. So sustain means to survive. It has enough of what it needs to survive. So, so sustainability, the sustainability of an ecosystem means, does it have everything it needs? Does it have water? Does it have enough, the right balance of producers, primary, secondary, tertiary consumers, um, shelter, food, water? In order for an ecosystem to be sustainable, it has to have all of those things. So I'm trying to give another example of sustainability that's like outside of politics. That's what I always think of when I think of something that's sustainable. But it's an ability for something to be balanced, to survive. Um, but an ecosystem sustainability is, it has to have enough of everything. So, like I said before, does it have enough food, shelter, water for all of the different organisms in that ecosystem? And if it doesn't, then it's not sustainable. Um, So, great question. Great question. Um, okay, that's really strange. Um, that somebody has my name. Uh, that is asking questions like that's weird. Okay. Reading. Okay. Hmm. All right. The food. Okay. Zachary, however, both the food pyramid and the food chain both show transfer of energy. Well, be careful, Zachary, because it's not the food pyramid, it's the energy pyramid. Um, so it is. I know we use food pyramid a lot because of nutrition, but remember it's an energy pyramid. But yes, they both show the transfer of energy. Okay. Um, okay. Um, so, other questions? I see somebody here is has a biology final on Thursday and wants to watch. That is fine. We're doing more ecology than anything, but you're welcome to watch. Okay. So isn't the energy pyramid like when a rabbit eats grass, it gets all the energy in the grass, but when we eat the rabbit, we get 10% of it? Um, so first of all, we don't put ourselves on the energy pyramid. Um, so we don't think of don't think of us as. So I just read a question. It says, and I'll read it again. Isn't the energy pyramid when a rabbit eats grass, it gets all the energy in the grass, but when we eat the rabbit, we get 10% of it. So take humans off of that. So as you go up the energy pyramid, uh, producers get 100% from the sun. And then um, it's sorry, I get distracted because I have to time people out. Um, okay, I'll try this again. So on the bottom is producers. They get 100% of the energy from the sun. Next would be primary consumers. They get 10% of that 100%. So let's say we started with the number 100, they would get 10. Then secondary consumers would get 1. Tertiary consumers would get zero point 0.1. So yes, it's 10% of the level before it, but don't put humans on there. Okay, it gets confusing. Varun, would studying the diagrams not help at all? No, it wouldn't help at all because it's not on the review, honey. Don't study anything that is not on the review. You're wasting your time. Really, I don't want you to waste your time. Okay. Um, so how could you identify percolation on a graph? You don't have to. Um, um, you wouldn't have to identify percolation on a graph. It might be a question like, uh, what is it called when water moves underground? But you don't have to identify percolation on a graph. Um, Thank you for being frustrated by the spammers. That's why I keep getting distracted because I have to take them off. Um, so that's why I have to do that. So okay, don't worry about it, y'all. If people are on here that shouldn't be on here, ignore it because it's kind of like a bully. They get a rise out of people reacting to their stupidity. So um, just ignore it, and I'll take care of it. Okay. Um, and I've already reported all of them to YouTube. So don't worry about it. Just ignore them. All right. So I think you're all kind of nervous about the. You're fine. You're totally fine. You guys are actually. I'm really happy that there are kids on here that aren't necessarily in my class. Don't get me wrong, students. I love having my students on, but Robert and Michael, I'm really glad that you're on the tutorial. So it's totally fine. But anyway, it sounds like y'all are nervous about that graph or the diagram. Don't be nervous about it, because basically the question is going to be more about if you were to look at a diagram of a city. Remember, don't forget about the lab that we did with the James St. James River, something like that. Sorry, um, um, and it talked about polluted river. And if you were to look at a diagram and you were to say, "Hey, there's a toxic chemical plant up um, north, at the northern part of the river, and the river runs north to south. What are the chances that um, that there could be some sort of pollution downriver?" I mean, I'm doing a really horrible job describing this um, because I'm trying to tell you kind of what might be on the test without telling you what's on the test. So, um, all right, let me look at the test again, and I'll tell you what kind of diagrams are on here, because y'all are here watching this, so you deserve a little benefit. So bear with me 1 second. I'm going to look at the test again, but I don't know why my computer's slow. It's because I am on YouTube, and that's why it's slow. Okay. Hang on, it's coming. All right, what kind of diagram? Let's see. Hang on. It's loading. Come on. Okay. So you will need to know so if you were to look at a diagram similar to the diagram that's on the review, okay, listen to me very carefully. If you were so just everybody pause on your questions for a minute, or you could just keep chatting them in. That's fine because there's a delay. But I'm just going to look at this review. I'm not looking at your questions because I can't look at both at the same time. So let's say there was a diagram almost exactly like the one on the review. Let's just say. And on the question, and the question says something about um, if there's, I'm trying not to say what the question is. Okay, so let's say that there is some sort of activity going on. It could be farming, it could be a chemical spill, whatever that is. And you can look at the diagram and you see there's like it says industry, and then you can see where it says spills. So spills is where there is water coming from the industry spilling into the lake. So if you look at this diagram, that's what you need to do. You need to look at that. Then where it says pump and treat, there's some other runoff that's going into the ground. Okay, can you see that? And it's pumped and it's being treated. Okay. Now, to the right of that is a road. definitely looks like a road to me. Excavation is where things are being dug up. I'm just clarifying for you the diagram that you have on your review that just happens to be on the test as well. Agriculture is a farm, okay? Then you have an injection well, which is literally, think of an injection, okay? Think of like a shot. When you get a shot, fancy word for a shot is an injection. So when you stick the shot into your skin, it's the same as sticking an injection into the ground and it pulls up water. Well, if you look way down, it's pulling up groundwater, right? Because that's what it says on the bottom. Then it says runoff, and runoff, there's a river, there's wetlands, and then it says runoff. So runoff is where water runs off of an area. So if you look at where it says agriculture, the water would be running off of the farm and into the river. Okay? So take a look at that. Does that make sense to everybody? So I'm going to have you pause, all right? I want everybody to look at the diagram. I can print the diagram, but I don't know that it would be as effective as you looking at your review because I I can't do a split screen on this. Um, so I'm going to get everybody take out your review. And again, I want you to look at the picture. So it's the exact same picture. Hang on. Yep, it's the exact same picture. All right. So I want you to look at it again. I'm going to start from the left and I'm going to work to the right. Okay. So remember, you can rewind this. So for some reason you don't have your review in front of you, you can take it out. So I'm going to go over it again. So on the left it says industry, and then it says spills. Okay. So there is some sort of liquid. I don't know what it is because I don't know what sort of industry it is that's spilling down into a lake. All right. Now, we don't know that it's bad water. It just says spills. Okay. And then under kind of south or below where it says industry, it says pump and treat. So there is some sort of water being taken out of the ground and it's being treated. You can also see that there's a road. I'm moving to the right now. Where it says excavation, that means there's some sort of, when something's excavated, it's like a hole is being dug in the ground, right? That's what excavate means. Moving to the right a little bit more, it says an injection well. Again, that is where a well is, it is just, there's a pipe that goes deep into the ground and it just pulls water out. It's pulling water out from the groundwater because you can see the pipe going down where it says groundwater. And then above that, you can see agriculture. Agriculture means a farm. All right. So if you look closely at that, you can see there's farmland. Whatever the name of that game was. I never played it. I was afraid I would get addicted to it. Farm land or farm, whatever. But those of you who played that, I guess that's what that looks like. And then there's a river, and you can see where it says runoff. It's almost like it's slanted, and that runoff goes from agriculture into the river. And then there's wetland because it must be lower elevation where the water kind of settles down there and it's kind of swampy. Okay, so if you were asked a question about a certain activity that happens, if it gave you a scenario like there was an explosion at the whatever industry that was at the factory, and all of the water that came out of out of that factory was filled with toxic waste. What would happen to the lake? Like that's what we're talking about. Hang on, Grace. Come here. Come here, honey. Come here, sweetheart. Come here. Stay here with mommy. That's my dog. So that's the scenario. That's the diagram. Other diagrams, you need to be able to read a food chain. So you would get, it would ask you, um, show you a food web actually, and it'll say maybe something happened to one thing within that food web. How does it affect other things within the food web? So you need to be able to um, read it correctly, which is, you know, that the arrow points to who's getting the energy. So don't misread that diagram. Um, let's see. Food web again. More food webs. Um, uh, a scenario very similar to the St. James Lab, where it told you about, where it says something happened upriver. What would the effect be downriver? And rivers always run north to south. The Nile runs south to north. It's the only one. Um, all right. So I hope that was helpful. So going back, so that's it for diagrams. But there's no skeletal system diagram, muscle diagram, heart diagram, nothing, nothing. So fight or flight response is just the body's response to stress or a stimulus. Well, yes, Tavishka, but it's not just a stimulus. Because a stimulus could be, I could like poke you, and that's a stimulus. It is something. It's a stressful stimulus. Okay, diagrams of groundwater that are similar to the one on the review. Yeah. Yes, that's right. Okay. Na, na, na. Well, the groundwater. What do you mean on the review? Can you please clarify fight or flight response? I know it's the body's response to an external stimulus, but how does it connect to the nervous and endocrine system? All right. So, fight or flight, it goes back to what, like I said, I gave in class, the example in class was like our Neanderthal days, where we would come across a saber-toothed tiger and we'd have to decide whether we're going to run or we're going to fight it. So it's not just a stimulus, it is something that is a really serious situation. It is absolutely frightening. um, so the reason why it affects your nervous system is because your heart starts to beat faster, blood starts to pump to whatever part of the body is necessary, depending on what the situation is. And your endocrine system, your nervous system sends a message to your adrenal glands that sit right on top of your kidneys, and your body makes adrenaline. And that is what helps all of these nervous system responses happen very quickly. So that's the difference. Fight or flight is something that is produces a great deal of anxiety. It is not just a stimulus. All right. Oh, for goodness sake. All right. All right. I'm just looking for questions. Oh my lord. Hang on. Okay. What? All right. So I meant, what is a watershed exactly, like a description? All right, guys, I got the blocking and the reporting. It's okay. It's I'm taking care of it. Just ignore it. Um, because clearly these people have nothing else to do, I guess. So this is what they feel is um, important in their lives. It's very bizarre, but I'm just reporting them as I go, so don't worry. Um, okay. Um, So let me see, where did I leave? Okay, so a watershed. All right. Yeah. So just like I said, just ignore bullies. We're trying to study. They clearly have nothing else going on in their lives. I wouldn't have time to spam somebody's YouTube. That's just too exhausting. All right. So hang on. I am going to find those posters because they're really helpful. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I Give me one more second. I'm going to find them. No, nope, nope, nope. My drive. Posters. Stop. Sorry. What? Stop it. Oh, there they are. Wait. Okay. Watershed. Oh, how do I? Okay, I guess I just print it. Okay, I am going to download these now, and then I'm going to put them on Schoology as an announcement, but that doesn't help all of you. All right, hang on. All right, I will print watershed and percolation. Runoff, I think you get. Hang on one second. Get to page. Come on, baby. All right, print. And then I will print the percolation. Bear with me here. Print, come on. Yeah, because if I post them on Schoology, that doesn't help the kids that aren't in my class. So I will print all of these, and then I will just hold them up old school and show you what they look like. Print one more. I'm going to print an aquifer one. Something went wrong. Seriously? I'll try again. Sorry. I'll stay on for the tutorial a little bit longer because I know this is taking a while. Print. And then aquifer. What the heck? Okay, I'm going to print that quickly. Not looking at the screen. So okay. All right, somebody explain the energy pyramid to Jamie, and I am going to go pick up the posters. Look out, puppy. Okay. So only one printed, of course. But I will send the posters to your teachers, and then you can get them from them. So, but it's really it's not any new information. I'm trying to see because it's on a delay, so I can't see if I'm okay. So hopefully this works. So this circle says the land area water flows across to drain into a lake, river, or other body of water. So a watershed. All right. So there's a picture of rain coming down, and then there's like houses here, and the area in front of the houses are getting flooded, and the water is running across the yard and into a river. So in this case, the watershed is the yard, or whatever place that the water, whatever the water touches. So let's say it's raining, and or there's irrigation, like the sprinkler in my yard, and the water runs across my yard and into. Um, let's pretend I had a river in front of my house. That'd be awesome, but I don't. Um, but that area that the water ran across before it ended up in another body of water is called a watershed. Okay, so Kelly, um, if you look at this poster, it's just a good picture of it, but it's literally, let's say it's farmland, and it's raining, or there's irrigation, and the water runs across the farmland, might pick up some pesticide, might pick up all kinds of good stuff, and it runs into a river that's nearby. That area that the water runs across is called a watershed. All right, that's the difference. All right. Um, okay. So I'm going to go back. Uh, all right. Bit confused on the function of the endocrine system. All right. The endocrine system is the function. It's a system that makes hormones, and hormones are in charge. Oh, sorry, that's my dog. Now she wants in. Make up your mind, girl. Okay. So the endocrine system is in charge of making hormones, and those hormones are um, what controls development and daily activities. So it is two main functions: is controls body's daily activities and long-term changes or stages of development. So you aren't going to develop beyond the body that you have now if you didn't have hormones. So it is every day. What did I say? I want to read it right from the review. Body's daily activities and long-term changes. So that's the endocrine system. That's what your hormones do. Okay. So it says, Kelly, a watershed is an area or region drained by a river, river system, or other bodies of water. It's it's that's not exactly what it is. That sounds like a Google answer. And just so it's a watershed is the land that water runs across before it ends up in a body of water. Okay. Really okay. Regulates, yes. Amber, good. Functions are okay. Zachary, good. If the water source upstream gets blocked, I'm not sure I understand the question there. Um, there's this app that I can show you that lets you use split screen. Armand, that's awesome. Thank you. Um, I'll have it for next year. Uh, but just I'm just reading your things in here. So what do you mean drained into rivers? Um, I'm just reading the questions. Hang on. And blocking people. Okay. So watershed there's a question here. A watershed is land that separates water flowing to different basins or seas. Don't 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 over define uh, what we need for this test. Okay, a watershed is simply an area of land that water runs across before it ends up in a body of water. So the issue is if you if you live in an area like where we live here in Texas, there are no bodies of water near my house. Okay. I wish well, I have a pool, but I wish there were. When I lived in Connecticut, there was a nice little brook. It was really nice. That was behind my house. Brook's like a very tiny river. Okay, and it ran into the lake behind my house. I had a lake also near my house. Anyway, all right. Um, if there was something on my property that was, if let's say I treated the grass with some sort of pesticide, so I would have nicer grass, and it rained, the water obviously would hit my yard, but eventually it would run into the creek, right? So it kind of was kind of at a nice little angle, and the water would just run from my grass down into the creek, and then, or the brook, whatever you want to call it. And then eventually that brook ran into the lake. So anything that was on my grass that was a pollutant or was good or was bad, usually we talk about it as bad, is going to run into that brook, which eventually run into the lake. My grass is a watershed. All right. So a watershed is an area of land. All right. It is land where that water runs across before ending up in a body of water. Okay. Um, so there aren't a lot of watersheds around here because there isn't a lot of unless you, well, I guess Denton Creek is a body of water. So if you have a house near Denton Creek and literally the creek, and you use pesticides in your yard, um, potentially your yard is a watershed that leads into Denton Creek that could pull pollution into the creek. And I'm sure the creek eventually goes to some sort of river, because smaller bodies of water go to bigger bodies of water, bigger, bigger, bigger. So that's how that all works. So um, I appreciate, let's see, somebody gave a definition um, of a watershed here, and I appreciate you looking it up and trying to figure out what it is. But just remember that to use a definition for our class for 7th grade, because if you just Google it, you'll often have way more, a much more difficult definition than than you would get from me. Okay. Uh, oh, girl. So somebody said, will cellular respiration be on the test? It's not on the review. It's not on the test. So please stop asking me questions that aren't on there. Like somebody, I I asked for a question for the um review we were going to do on Friday, or because I changed it up a little bit. I said, using the review, make some good test questions. And two different people, the question was, what is the equation of photosynthesis? It's not on the review. So it's not on the test. People. All right. Um, okay. So here's my recommendation. Do not definitely study. Not not saying don't study. Don't overstudy. Okay? So if it says know the function of the circulatory system, all you need to know is the function. Okay? What is the circular? If somebody said to you, your little brother, little sister, what does the circulatory system do? You'd say it pumps blood around your body, and blood carries oxygen and nutrients to your, body tissues, and it carries carbon dioxide and waste away from your body tissues. That's all you need to know about the circulatory system. I know we went over a lot more than that, but for the sake of this final that you need to take in 49 minutes or whatever it is, you're not going to be asked that question. I promise you, Coach Wilson and Miss Aguirre and myself aren't like, oh, let's see what questions that we can put on the test that they'll never be able to answer. I promise you, we're not doing that. So, um, I know that we didn't spend a lot of time on the groundwater and aquifer things, um, but if, like, for example, runoff, just think of logically what would runoff be. When water runs off of a polluted runoff would run off of a farm that has pesticides on it. That water would be polluted. That would be polluted runoff. Um, and like I said, a watershed is a piece of land that water crosses before it hits um, a bigger body of water. And like I said, unfortunately, that bigger body of water goes to a bigger body of water, and then it just pollutes the next thing, and then pollutes the next thing. So that's why that's important. Um, so let's see. See if there are any other questions. Okay. Um okay. You guys have to stop telling each other to shut up because it's just be helpful to each other. Okay. Oh, you're stressing me out. Yeah, 30 multiple choice questions. Oh, that's so nice. I don't know why people have to. I think people have way too much time on their hands. It's really kind of bizarre. Um, okay. And the rest I've written. I don't understand, Sanche. I don't understand your question. There's 30 multiple choice questions. That's all. Yeah, and spammers are jerks. Don't give them the time of day. It's okay. Just ignore it. Okay. Um, okay. So I hope it was helpful. I'm going to take a look at the review again and just. All right. So first part of it is body systems: digestive, circulatory, respiratory, urinary and excretory, skeletal, muscular, nervous, endocrine. And then fight or flight is under that, and reproductive. What you need to know is the main function of each one of those systems. Okay. So if you were to see a list of different functions of a system, could you tell me what system it was? So if I said to you, um, carries blood, pumps blood around the body, um, gets nutrients and oxygen to where it needs to be, removes carbon dioxide and waste products from the body. Could you tell me what that was? Of course you could. It's the circulatory system. So that's as much as you need to know about the systems. Okay. So you don't need to study any of the diagrams. You don't need to study any of the um, structures, like knowing the structure of kidneys and all. You don't need to know that. Like I said, if I tell you that, I'm not lying. I promise you, your teachers want you to do well. Really, I promise. Um, okay, the next part is Okay. Adaptations. So you know the definition of an adaptation. Adaptation is to survive and reproduce in your environment. There are three types of adaptations: external, features, behaviors, and physiology. So um, if you if you were asked what is an example of um, a physiological adaptation on a cactus, obviously they're all multiple choice, so make sure you use your test taking strategies because you could probably take out at least 50% of the answers. Then it would be, the waxy coating on the cactus that keep water in. I mean, you can do that. You need to know habitat, um, which was that pink piece of paper that teachers gave you, your teachers gave you, that added those three vocabulary words. Um, Natural selection, we talked about that. So it allows organisms that are better adapted to survive and reproduce. So the better your adaptations, the better chance you have to survive and reproduce. And reproduce is important because if you don't reproduce, your species is going to die out. Then you need to know what things can affect natural selection. And then, like I said, the three vocab words: habitat, niche, and energy pyramid. Um, you need to know energy transfer, which is basically food chain, food web, energy pyramid. And then succession, primary, secondary succession. Um, and then the vocabulary for groundwater. So, groundwater, permeable versus impermeable rock or soil. What is an aquifer? Water table, artesian well, springs, runoff, including polluted, watershed, and percolation. So, the questions seem to be when you all were asking questions about groundwater were mainly watershed and percolation. So, like I said, watershed is an area of land, okay, of, of land um, that drains into a river, and often it pulls bad stuff with it. And then percolation is the movement of water underground. Um, so, if you want to look up a percolator. A percolator. It made a really cool sound, and it just was like this coffee was like bubbling at the top. That might help you. And then when it comes to that diagram, it's going to say it'll give you a scenario. The test will give you a scenario. What if something were to happen at a certain point on this diagram, whether it was at the factory, in the lake, at the farm? How would that affect X? And that's the kind of question you would get from that. All right. So it looks like I'm reading. You guys are kind of answering each other's questions now. No, there are no written questions. They're all multiple choice. Um, and you will have a copy of the test that you can mark up all you want, but all of your answers are going to have to end up on the bubble sheet because it is a Mastery Connect. Okay, so I'll say one more time on the time and soil. Um, we put that on there for primary and secondary succession as a hint. The difference between primary and secondary succession is time and soil. Primary succession takes way longer, has no soil. Secondary succession doesn't take as long, like a tenth of the time. Let's say primary is 1,500 years, secondary is 150 years for it to reach sustainability. There's that word for the ability for there's an equal number of predators and prey and producers and shelter and water. So that's called a climax community where it's perfect. And then secondary takes 150 years approximately, and it has soil. So that's the difference. That's totally fine. I'm glad you guys are asking questions. So I'm going to sign off. I see that you're subscribing to my channel. That's awesome. Please, again, do not torture yourself with being worried about the minutia, the tiny, tiny details about the systems. Because my goal, our goal as your teachers, is to get you to have a overall understanding of the system so that when you take biology in ninth grade, you are more prepared. That's it. Okay. Um, if you need clarification about the watershed and all that stuff, I'm going to post these posters. Post the posters. Give me a minute. Let me see. I wonder if I can. I don't know that I can add a document to this um, chat. So I will um, ask, I will email Coach Wilson and Miss Aguirre and ask them to email you or put on Schoology these posters that I'm talking about. Because for me, I always like seeing things. So I will put those on Schoology now, and I will ask Coach Wilson and Miss Aguirre to do the same. If you have any other specific questions, you guys look like you have a really great community of helpers with each other. It looks like somebody who's going to make a quizzes or a whatever. Um, so that's awesome. Support each other, help each other out. Um, I'm happy for any clarification. Do not come in and ask me like the definition of something that's on the review. Because remember, your review is due when you walk in the door to your test tomorrow. And you need to hand the hard copy in. Um, then it's a 0 or 100. There's no wiggle room on that. If you did it on Schoology, make sure you print it before you walk into class. It's a 0 or 100. I don't know how many other ways we can say that. But if you want to come in early, 7:30, you're welcome to come into my room and ask me any clarification questions. The doors open at 7:30. I'm sure those of you who have athletics, you could tell your coaches, hey, I need some clarification on my science test, and I'm happy to answer them. But do not come and ask me questions like on the review, like what is groundwater, and then jot it down because that's not cool. Um, so I will put some resources on Schoology, and I will send those resources to your teachers, Coach Wilson and Miss Aguirre, have them put it on there too. So um, use good test taking strategies. I really appreciate those of you who took the time to sign in and ignore some of the foolishness by some of our spammers. You guys are awesome. I'm sure you're going to do very well, and I will. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay. So now I got to figure out how to stop this thing. All right. Ciao, y'all.